That was a clip of photographer Ilse Bing, and it was, I set some of my music to it, a piece called Paris that I did in 1971 on the Buchla. Ilse Bing was my mentor. I met her in New York City. She was already in her 80s, and I was a young, aspiring electronic music composer. And I had no role models at that time because I didn't know of any other women in technology. But Ilse adopted me in a way. I met her because I collected black and white photography. And I was introduced to her by a fellow photographer from Russia. And he brought me to her apartment. Her husband, Konrad Wolf, was a famous musicologist. So I had a relationship with both Ilse and with Konrad, her husband. Ilse was called the Queen of the Leica. She photographed in Paris in the late 20s and the 30s. She was originally from Frankfurt, Germany. And she was called the Queen of the Leica. So she was a pioneer in photography. And the same way I was called the diva of the diode, she was the queen of the Leica. And we had so much to share because her art form was technological. In those days, the camera was a piece of machinery, and using it was involved both a knowledge of the equipment, but also an intuitive process where you just sensed, what you were doing. And she was a romantic. Her vision was playful, sensual, just something that resonated with me. I love her photography. Ilse and I stayed friends for many, many years until she died at the age of 99. Always when I met her, I would go to her apartment, and the first thing she would say is, Suzanne, tell me about your work. What is happening with your work? And I thought, this is really, she was very intense and very intellectual. She came from that tradition of, European passion and depth for art. And she taught me so much. We actually collaborated on a piece. So for one of my albums, she wrote the lyrics. It was a piece called Lumiere. And she did in her later years, she stopped doing photography and she was doing collage. So she did a collage to this piece, and it was in the shape of a wave. So, because my pieces were called waves, and that was the energy and the compositional form of my music. Lumiere was the last piece on my album, Neverland. And after that recording, Ilse presented me with a collage of the lyrics of that song, and I have it here. This is the original one. So she tore a piece of paper, and the whole meaning of the poem builds, recedes, and builds and recedes. And it's a mixture of French and English words. The thing I loved about Ilse's prints was the actual darkroom technique that she had. She was a pioneer. She was trained as a scientist, and she took all of her expertise and skill into the darkroom. She was well known for experimenting with darkroom techniques. She discovered, for instance, solarization independently before Man Ray, who's often credited with having discovered solarization. She was the first one to use a 35 millimeter camera as an art form camera, because prior to that, it wasn't okay to use a small camera as a serious photographer. But what it helped her to do was experiment with motion techniques and to be able to get certain shots that couldn't be achieved with a large format camera. So one of the things I love about her prints is just the quality of the print. You know, I have certain prints and you look at the black and it's like velvet. Some people appreciate photography for the image, but for me it's more about the technique in the darkroom and the quality of the print. And this is something that's absolutely gone today because everything is digital. So if you go to some of these earlier silver prints, you can appreciate the special quality of each print being unique. People don't understand that a photograph is not just a stamp of an image. Every print is uniquely made in the darkroom. And this next clip is Roger Federer and Rafael Nadal playing tennis. Here we go.